These fatalities are completely unacceptable because they are completely avoidable. There is no excuse for not increasing the safety of our streets and sidewalks for the people of Seattle. No excuse.
Well, that's Councilmember Tammy Morales at a meeting last month calling on her colleagues to come through on the promises of Vision Zero, zero fatalities for pedestrians and cyclists in our city. As it turns out, the city does not appear to be getting closer to that goal, especially over the last few months with a number of cycling and pedestrian deaths. And this week, the Seattle Department of Transportation is trying to chart a path forward. So what is next for Vision Zero? What's the latest on rate increases for Seattle City Light? And what's the city council going to do about the mayor's veto of some rental regulations that they voted to approve? Well, we are untangling these mysteries and many more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And I'm joined by David Crowan, who is a transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. David, it's always great to be with you. And I'm wondering, as a transportation reporter here, I'm wondering why this past weekend you were not assigned to the first naked cycling event the Fremont Solstice Riders have been able to have since 2019. It seems like a big, important story, calls for major reporter involvement. Just trying to figure out what happened there.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought of that as a transportation story. I guess we treated it more like a cultural or a lifestyle choice story.
I see. But these issues all come together. We'll have to talk more about that later on. Well, David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to all of our listeners. Thanks to City Grind Espresso. They are our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks especially to our patrons. I'm pleased to announce Rob has joined us over the past week. Rob is the most popular name of all our patrons, as it turns out. We got intern Rob. I still care about you deeply, my man. Robbie, you're awesome, but a special welcome to your new brother, who is also named Rob. Now, we send out a special Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug to our $10 a month supporters, and you can get a special mention on our mugshot of the week. This week, Lynn sends in another one from the backyard, a summer scene unfolding there. Thank you for your support, Lynn. Thank you for sending in those photos. So if you're a patron, do send in a photo with your mug. We really want to put them on the air. Thanks to Converge Media 2. The video of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's do this thing. Time for Right Here, Right Now. All right, well, here we go. Vision Zero, big meeting for the Transportation Committee on Tuesday, and I'll give you some stats to start here, folks. So since Seattle began this Vision Zero effort in 2015 to have zero fatalities in terms of traffic collisions, etc., nearly 1,200 people have been seriously injured and 175 people have been killed in traffic crashes. David, I know you've reported on this issue extensively. Do you see anything in this Vision Zero presentation by SDOT this week that's going to be a game changer when it comes to realizing this commitment from the city to have zero traffic deaths by the year 2030?
I don't know. Yeah, hard to know if anything will be a game changer. I mean, this is, it's a national trend that's been happening. This is not just Seattle. Nationwide, last year saw the highest number of deaths in 16 years, and it's almost exactly the same in basically any jurisdiction you look, that increase. So this is a nationwide thing. Although, that said, a lot of people blame the pandemic because emptier roads means people driving faster,
higher speeds, and that always leads to worse crashes for sure.
Yeah, exactly. That said, the numbers were going up even before the pandemic, and in this presentation they're forecasting that they're going to continue to go up in coming years. One thing, I don't know if it's game changing exactly, but something we've seen shift a lot more is kind of away from. Obviously, this hasn't gone away, but sort of away from, in some ways, kind of trying to instruct individuals to, slow down, and the kind of PSA,
right,
and more focus, at least in Seattle, on what is the infrastructure doing to kind of force people to slow down. So the theory being, rather than sort of focusing on individual mistakes, accepting that human beings are prone to error and are going to make mistakes. So how do you create a system where when they do make those mistakes, inevitably they don't end in serious collisions or deaths?
Right. And trying to find a way to design around that, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So it's more of a design focus and more of a kind of systemic focus. Of course, the issue with that is really expensive. It's really expensive, and it takes a really long time to overhaul entire systems. And people are dying now, so it's I don't know that there's a quick fix. I do think that maybe there's a little more urgency around actually kind of pursuing this goal of Vision Zero, because clearly it hasn't. The city has not been moving in the right direction, or the direction
No.
that they want to be.
And where people are dying, unfortunately, has a big piece of this discussion too, because in looking at this, the equity issues, I think, with Vision Zero just really jump out at you. So for the last 3 years, nearly half of the fatal crashes in our city have happened in District 2. It's the southeast corner of the city. Many of communities of color live there. Tammy Morales represents that district. She's clearly upset about this. And that number really increased in 2021. David, I just want to look at those numbers focusing on equity and what they tell you.
Yeah, I mean, they tell me, and more, more than that, if you look at redlining maps,
Right.
how they correlate to traffic deaths, there's it's not a 1-to-1 correlation, but it does appear to be a correlation between areas that have long been kind of the subject of frankly pretty racist urban planning, and now we're sort of seeing the impacts of that, and so you think of roads like Rainier Avenue, that's historically been one of the most dangerous in the city, and Soto to a certain extent too. But yeah, I mean, it's I think we are kind of reaping what we've sown as far as how certain parts of the city have been developed, and where community has been listened to the most, and it tends to community members in South Seattle have not historically had as much input into how their city is being developed around them, and I think as a result, you see roads like Rainier Avenue, which is just very, very dangerous, and for particularly for pedestrians and bikers.
Yeah, cars too. There's a lot of information on those collisions as well. Just to wrap this up, David, I see this phrase paradigm shift used a number of times in this report, and I am trying to figure out where we go from here. This idea of let's prioritize the safe movement of human beings rather than the fast movement of vehicles. You got a growing city like Seattle. I know there are some trade-offs there and some potential issues when you try to think about that paradigm shift.
Yeah, of course. I do think that for a few reasons, I do think that the conversation around designing cities has changed in recent years. One, I think for me, the biggest factor has been the pandemic, which is that more people talked about, how do we create more public space for people to enjoy, because everyone's locked inside and we want open space and airy space, and so we've seen the street cafes and parking being taken away in certain places to kind of make room for more pedestrians. So that spurred a big shift, and then also we've seen you can argue about what the Biden administration or the federal government has actually done, but as far as the language that Pete Buttigieg is using as Secretary of Transportation, he has been speaking much more publicly about traffic deaths and pedestrian safety, because I do think that people have, for the most part, kind of just gotten used to the fact that thousands of people die on the roads every year.
Just to jump in on the Buttigieg, I thought it was a great quote. If we had 3,000 deaths on our subways or airlines, people would be up in arms, but we seem to take it for granted when it happens on our roads every month. I mean, that's a big number there across the country.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that, to a certain extent, I again, related to the pandemic, people have been so much more conscious of, we've been tracking how many people are dying every day from coronavirus, and we've been really much more tuned into kind of public health and what is killing people. And then I think as part of the habit of doing that, you inevitably start to look to other things and say, well, we're spending all this time and energy and we're staying home and we can't go see our friends in order, justifiably in order to prevent unnecessary death. And yet, we look at traffic deaths and we're really not doing any of that. So why is kind of, I think, the question. And I do think that as a result, we have seen more focus on, how do you redesign streets so that fewer people die? Of course, this is, I wouldn't call it widespread exactly. Highways are still being built. Not only are roads not being redesigned
Yeah.
to accommodate pedestrians. They are actually, a lot of places are actually adding new highways. So this is not exactly a 180 turn that we're seeing, but it's a cruise. If you think of the cruise ship analogy, it's maybe a slow turn that is starting to happen.
Yeah, well, definitely something we're going to be watching over the next couple of weeks here. David, thanks for the insight there. I wanted to move on to another issue here. Also on the docket this week, a series of Seattle City Light rate increases working their way ever closer to City Council approval. This is in the City Light Committee this week, likely headed for full council approval next week. So main takeaway here, folks, rates are going up. That's nothing new, but they're going up by about 0.7% more than what City Light had projected they go up in 2021. What does that mean for homeowners? Your average ratepayer out there, another $4 a month, a 4.5% increase. Why is this happening? I wanted to dive into this. It's very complex, but this one issue I'm seeing raised in this report, David, is a bit of a red flag for me, talking about inflation. Here's a quote from the report. The estimates for inflation in 2022 are growing as City Light proposes the rate path. So those estimates are going up as City Light's actually putting out this proposal here. While this is of concern, it's not a phenomenon unique to City Light's budget, and as with other city departments, the council may wish to closely track City Light's budget as we move through uncertain economic times. I just wanted to bring this up, David, because seeing all these headlines about inflation around the country as we try to get out of pandemic mode, but it does make me wonder, how will this impact city budget discussions this fall? City Light, a lot of other departments too. What's that going to be like trying to chase a moving target that's really being affected by inflation right now?
Yeah, I don't know. As you mentioned, the energy market, all this is pretty complex. This does seem like kind of exactly what economists fear around inflation, which is City Light responding to inflation by raising prices, therefore contributing to inflation of energy prices. Right. This kind of spiral that economists warn about and are kind of most scared of. City Light is supposed to be kind of a self-contained entity. It's there's a reason why they charge rates specifically for City Light, and I think inflation is just another issue that City Light has been kind of following for years. The model of City Light, in some ways, it faces and has faced kind of an existential issue, which is that people are using less electricity.
True,
which is,
right?
A good thing from one respect, because climate change and we want to decrease our consumption, but also it puts City Light in kind of a tough position because it is supposed to be a self-funding department. Their budget doesn't come from the general fund like other departments. And so it's tricky because it's not a private company like and I think a lot of people think that's a good thing, but it does mean that unlike if PG&E has issues, they've got to kind of answer to shareholders, and it's the private business's problem. This is not a private business's problem. When Seattle decided it wanted a public utility, it also accepted the responsibility for kind of ensuring its sustainability.
Yeah, and I just wanted to take it one step further and kind of look at the flip side of this, David, which you touched on earlier. So according to this report from City Light, you have 40,000 residential and business customers with unpaid bills. The dollar amount of those unpaid bills, nearly $40 million. So I know the city has passed a number of measures over the past few years to try to keep utilities on for people who might have financial hardships or whatever else. But as we're kind of moving out of pandemic mode, City Light is going to restart its collection practices, which could mean cutting off power for unpaid bills after attempting to get people to take advantage of many of the assistance programs out there. I just think about this big challenge, David, trying to right the ship for City Light in terms of making sure those bills are paid while trying to make sure that thousands of people don't get cut off.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same things we've talked about with eviction moratorium.
Right.
Assistant, child tax credit and unemployment benefits. A lot of these things that were built to prop up individuals and the economy during the pandemic, which basically worked at the time. But the tricky part, and I think what we're seeing nationwide, is how do you. Is that economy kind of ready to stand on its own? And I think it's the same question that landlords and tenants are facing, same question that City Light's facing. And very interesting you bring up landlords, because we're going to be talking about this. The first veto of Bruce Harrell's tenure
Will the council be able to overturn it? It's all about landlords. Let's talk about this. Will the council be able to overturn it? Does it even want to overturn it? We're going to break it down on Now Hear This. Well, Mayor Bruce Harrell executed the first veto in his administration of a council bill on June 10th, a bill that would have required landlords to publicly share more information about their rent data. Now, this was a bill that had two unlikely co-sponsors, Councilmember Peterson and Councilmember Morales. And Councilmember Peterson is calling the question in a meeting coming up in the first week of July. Here's how he made the case at a recent council meeting.
A majority of council members obviously supported the bill, so the veto is disappointing, as Councilmember Morales and I expressed in the statement we issued this past Friday. For the four colleagues who did not vote in favor on May 31st, please know I'm available to discuss with any of you further the merits of reconsidering on July 5.
So, David, looking at this, yes, there was a majority of council members who approved this measure, but it was a very close 5-4 vote, and the council would need 6 votes to override the veto. I want to look at the politics of this first. Do you have the sense that Councilmember Peterson can convince one more council member to join him in pushing back against this veto? I'm trying to figure out what message that would send with the one Seattle ethic the mayor's been espousing over the last several months.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems unlikely. I think if a council member wanted to support this, they would have supported it from the first round. And, I think, one of the reasons why Mayor Harrell vetoed this was concerns about how much it cost. And, as we have a story in the newspaper this morning from my colleague, Sarah Grace, about the $117 million hole in the city's budget that they have to fill. So, not that much has changed, I don't think, between... I think there was some thought that maybe they could reduce the cost of this, and maybe that would be kind of tempting to the other council members. But this is an interesting thing because, anytime Councilmember Peterson and Councilmember Sawant vote on the same bill,
right,
is an
what's
interesting,
going on? Yeah,
is an interesting bill, and I do think that this kind of gets at the nuances of individual council members' views on development.
Yep, exactly.
Which is that council member Peterson is kind of famously skeptical of increased density and
mandatory housing affordability policy for the city. He's been a critic of that for many years. Keep going.
Right. And so, as my colleague Heidi Groover had kind of pointed out, his motivation for this seemed to be because he wanted to, get a better sense of the amount of, quote, naturally affordable housing. And in some ways to kind of, it seemed to show that, maybe Seattle doesn't need to be adding as much density as some of the urbanist types are kind of advocating for. And as we know with Councilmember Sawant, she has voted for all of the upzones in the past, so she's not anti-density. But at the same time, she is, she's a socialist, sort of borderline communist, and so is not exactly a big fan of looking to private developers to solve the city's housing crisis. And so,
keep going. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say with Sawant, I think she supported this because she almost had an idea that this was something that could help bolster her arguments for rent control and some of these other measures she's been working on.
Right, exactly. So I think that their two reasons are different in some ways because, but both of them, it feels like are looking for data to kind of justify the position that they have already. And, I think in the grand scheme, I don't know that, as a reporter, I'm always interested in seeing more data. I'd be happy to see more data from this. I don't think this is necessarily has to be a controversial thing. The Northwest Multiple Listing Services used to put out data all the time. They don't really do that anymore, but that was a private company that you had to pay for. And so it's not like it would be a new thing exactly to like have this data, but the concerns seem to be, how much does it cost to implement? And what is the burden on landlords to produce this data? And then, the sort of more politic-y side of it, which is what we just talked about, is what are the council members going to do once they have this data in their hands?
Right. It's interesting. You look at this Dupree and Scott private company, husband and wife team actually did this for 38 years, but they closed up in 2017, and Seattle really hasn't had good data since then. And I think this is going to become a more and more important issue, David, as we approach this update of the comprehensive plan, which I know a lot of people are bored about, but this is something that covers up zones, et cetera, in 2024. And I think there's a lot of positioning going on right now to try to get the data that's going to help out here. And I'm not sure if this bill is the way, but that's going to be a big argument point, talking point, as this idea or debate, I guess, over the comprehensive plan plays out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do think that at the end of the day, if you're sort of trying to scratch your head around how these alliances have come together and why why this is controversial to collect some data, I do think that is part of it, which is various council members with kind of points of view on how the city should develop, kind of positioning themselves to make that argument in a specific way in the coming years as the city develops its comprehensive plan.
So much going on there. We'll see what happens on July 5th, but I did want to cover another issue here. Funny thing happened on the way to the ballot last week here, folks. An initiative for approval voting, I-134, could be on your ballot this fall. So what's approval voting? I covered this on a patrons-only podcast a couple of months ago with the sponsor of this measure, Logan Bowers. So this would affect how Seattle picks mayors, city council members, and city attorneys. You could select multiple candidates in each primary instead of just one. So the two candidates with the most votes in the primary would still advance, as they do now. In the general, you would still only select one candidate. So supporters say this is a way to more accurately reflect voter views. David, do you have some thoughts about approval voting? This can be a complicated issue for some people.
It is a complicated issue, and I don't have a sort of great grasp of how this would actually play out in the real world, because it's experimental in some ways. I don't.
Right.
Maybe there are places. I don't know. I'm no expert in this. I haven't seen any kind of real world experiment in how this would play out.
St. Louis recently adopted this, but a lot more jurisdictions out there use that ranked choice voting, which I think a few people have heard about in our state. But keep going.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was going to say, which is I know that the proponents of ranked choice voting do not like this. Because ranked choice voting. You kind of tier them a little bit. This creates a little bit more of a flat system. I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't have a great grasp of how this would play out. I'd be certainly interested to see, but my sense is opponents of this are kind of concerned that you could push, more slates through to the general election, that it would dominate. Because, we know that older and whiter homeowners, tend to vote more. So if they could all vote for multiple candidates,
I see. Okay.
Maybe that voting block would be a little more dominant rather than kind of what we have right now, which is you've got a bunch of candidates, and there tends to be kind of a more moderate candidate and a more progressive candidate who make their way through. I don't know. I have no sense of whether or not these arguments, how these would actually play out in real time.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out for sure, because the city council could take this and make it law. They could put it on the ballot as is. They could offer their own competing ballot measure or whatever else. But it's one of those situations where just when you think, that ballot November, there's not going to be too much going on there. It's getting crowded pretty quickly with some interesting stuff. So very much interested to see what happens next there. But all right, we're going to talk about what's coming up next. What's happening with the 4th Avenue South Bridge here, and why has it remained unprepared after 3.5 years of serious structural problems? That's coming up on Transportation Talk. David, you recently wrote about a troubling transportation issue on 4th Avenue South of downtown, where a bridge over the rail yards there, deemed as functionally obsolete several years ago, still hasn't been repaired. What's going on with this?
Yeah, this is an interesting story. So in late 2017, during a routine inspection of the bridge, crews noticed pretty significant cracking happening, especially kind of on the sides where you're actually leaving the roadway and getting onto the bridge, and found that it would, if say a big traffic jam and the bridge was full, they couldn't guarantee that it's able to hold maximum weight.
Wow.
And so as a result, they closed down one of the two northbound lanes and then push all trucks into the center lane going southbound. And so if you go down there, it's got these cones lined up.
Yep.
This bridge has two issues, which is the kind of immediate one, which is the cracks that need repairing so that it can actually hold the weight. And then there's the kind of longer term issues around seismic stability. That's sort of a separate issue, which will cost a lot more and which the city also needs to figure out.
Yeah.
We're kind of talking about these more immediate cracks. And so, they thought maybe, they would just fix it. They'd spend $5 to $10 million fixing it. But because it goes over these rail tracks, if they wanted to do the work from below, which is really what they needed to do, they need to get a permit from Union Pacific, which owns these railroad tracks, and they have 3.5 years later have still not been able to do that. Union Pacific is really hesitant to allow crews down there. They really don't want to disrupt any train operations, and yet the city kind of had looked into doing all the repairs from the top and just basically found that they couldn't do that. It was not feasible, and so they're in this stalemate where the city needs to get underneath, and Union Pacific is saying basically no. And so they're hopeful, they say, that they will have a plan by the end of this year and can maybe do construction next year. But as of this moment, they still don't have any agreement with Union Pacific to do that work. And so the bridge is still reduced by a lane, and it still technically cannot support the full weight that it should be able to.
Wow. I know we have a lot of bridges around the city that have a number of different issues and functionally obsolete. I've seen that phrase attached to a number of them as well. But this is just such a frustrating thing, I think, for, I guess, everybody involved there. Do you see any headway on this in the year ahead? What's going to unpack the logjam? Any ideas there?
Well, I think what could impact the logjam is that if something were to go wrong with this bridge, it's also Union Pacific's problem. Because if they think having crews down there is an issue, if concrete starts falling onto their train tracks, that's maybe a much bigger issue.
That sounds bad,
both sides are saying, yes, we're still in conversation. We think we can kind of figure this out. But it has been 3.5 years and nothing's changed. So Councilmember Peterson suggested even going to our federal delegation to work this out, because the railroads are under kind of federal supervision. And
right.
It does kind of get at this larger interesting thing, which is that because basically the railroad tracks were there before Seattle became what it is today, they have priority over these. So Seattle has to work around the railroad tracks, which can be a really frustrating thing in a city that is, just trying to move its people from point A to point B.
Right.
And then, as you mentioned, of course, there's the much bigger problem, which is, there are at least 16 bridges that are in immediate need of seismic upgrades. This bridge alone could use, more than $200 million worth of seismic upgrades that are totally kind of separate from just this one repair problem.
Right.
And recently, the Seattle Department of Transportation has actually scaled back the number of bridges that they think they can fix because of budget issues. So again, there's the kind of immediate problem of this lane being closed, and then the arguably much bigger problem that the city has not figured out yet, which is a lot of its bridges are in need of a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. I'm imagining there's a few people in the Magnolia neighborhood who read this article and tell me all about it. Right. There's a number of different places that have those issues. But thank you, David, for bringing all those pieces up. We need to start wrapping up the show, but I wanted to talk to you about something I thought was very interesting. I saw that you recently took a ride on a Velo scooter out there, which I haven't tried yet. And I think that's mainly because the mini pedals on there look like maybe a hamster could use them.
Right.
What's going on with this? What was your experience like?
They're fun because they're pretty zippy and they've got a throttle. The fact that they are called bikes is kind of hilarious to me, because I was riding one and you kind of push the pedal and it gets you up to 17, 18 miles per hour. So you get going pretty quickly. But when you pedal, it's just spinning. It's not doing anything. I never once successfully used the pedals to go anywhere. I'm not sure if it's like bringing a charge, but calling them bikes seems like kind of a loophole.
Bit of a stretch there.
They're clearly just electric scooters.
I see. Yeah, I was trying to think of the old moped days with trying to really motor around on the pooch or something like that. Not exactly the same there.
No,
I'm glad you made it through there, David. And thank you, as always, for helping me out with the show. Thanks to everybody listening out there. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is available on all the major podcast platforms out there. And once again, if you are a listener, please do support the show on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. It would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.